Right. So if you can just start off by letting me know how your normal match day goes about.
Well, in normal times, I tend to arrive at the ground 3 hours before kickoff, that sort of time. And in normal times, of course, the logistics are very different because there are a lot of people, there's a lot of traffic, the trains are full and so on. But it's been very different since restart because all of those things don't exist and actually are not even allowed in the ground 3 hours before. The whole logistical process is different. It's in some senses easier in that it's possible to drive right up close to a football ground now and park close by and not have to concern yourself with congestion and all of that sort of thing. But of course, you know, you have to be masked and you have to be temperature checked and go through that sort of protocol. And rather than mixing with fellow broadcasters and journalists, go straight up to the position from which you'll commentate and stay there until the game kicks off. So there isn't the same interaction at all. It's much more sort of lonely event.
Yeah. I guess my question for you would be what was the most challenging part for you in all these changes?
I think just maintaining an energy through the football match when there isn't that energy being provided for you by the crowd. The broadcast is more or less the same, except that normally as a commentator, in terms of the soundtrack for a game, I suppose it's like being a sort of soloist with a backing choir. And it's a very different exposed sort of experience when that backing choir doesn't exist.
It's not there, yeah.
And when a goal is scored, you know, generally speaking, you surf the wave of crowd noise. And that isn't there to surf. Now, when commentating on the whole in the games I've done up to now, I have had the piped crowd noise in my ears. So that's useful because at least it sets a level. And without it, I think you dip as a commentator down to a very conversational level, which might be in danger of being unexcited or unexciting. So that's useful, but it's still not the same emotional lift that tens of thousands of people absolutely breathing down your neck and creating an atmosphere offers.
Yeah. You know, we were lucky enough at university to have a guest lecture from Clive Tydesley. And I asked him this question, you know, he was speaking about how he was commentating on a bit of a boring, not really exciting game. And I asked him this question, as a commentator, do you feel when there's less excitement in the game, whether it's from the crowd or on the pitch, do you ever feel this kind of natural responsibility to bring the entertainment from yourself?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting one because I don't think it's the commentator's job to pretend it's exciting when it's not exciting, because our job is to reflect what is actually happening. Having said that, during a particularly dull game, part of the challenge is to uncover the interest where it exists. So find information, use knowledge to illustrate something which might otherwise in an exciting game go unnoticed. That's a lot of what the homework that you do is all about. And also appreciate that fans watch football matches in a very partisan way. So if the game is 0-0 and meandering along with 75 minutes gone, a lot of people might be thinking from a neutral point of view, this is a tedious football match. But you have to remember there are two sets of supporters here. There are 15 minutes of this game left. And they're both thinking, cool, we might win this, we might lose this. You know, it only takes 1 minute. This game might be dull for everybody else, but it's right on edge. Yeah. So in that sense, there's no such thing as a boring game, because for a committed support, anyone who supports a team understands this, that it could be the worst game of football there's ever been. But if it's very, very tight, right to the very end, you're thinking, wow, just one moment for us and we've won this. But equally, you're terrified of just one moment for them and we've lost it. So even when it's boring, it's exciting.
Yeah. I guess when the game is boring right now, you don't have the supporters now to bring the excitement that it lacks.
Well, that is true. But I mean, even when there are supporters, you can be at a game where the kind of supporters have reached a stage of almost mutually agreeing, wow, we've got nowhere to go with this. I mean, obviously there are great supporters around the UK who maintain a bubble for the most part, but even when they're in, there are lulls in the crowd noise and so on. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that is what gives football its energy at top professional level. The fantastic supporters who shout and sing and jump up and down and create an atmosphere. And without them, I think it does make it a slightly more difficult broadcast because they're like the sort of your battery. They're what keep you energized. And I think it's frankly probably slightly harder for players in certain circumstances too, because they're used to playing to a gallery and that gallery isn't there for them.
Yeah. What have been like from your perspective as a commentator, and obviously you can see quite a bit of the pitch. What as a person that's been in the game and inside the stadium, what do you feel has been like what has been the most effective thing from these changes?
Sorry, I'm not sure what you're driving at. In a positive sense, or
What has these how? Let me reword it perhaps. How has these changes mainly affected the game in general from your perspective?
Oh, well, I think, and I'm not sure because we haven't seen enough games for it to be a big enough sample size, but my sense now is that, broadly speaking, the better team wins. Mm-hmm. Now, broadly speaking, the better team wins anyways, you might retort, but the chance of an upset, I think, is much, much smaller than it used to be. A fairly obvious recent example, a couple of weeks before lockdown, Watford beat Liverpool. Mm. Now, that is more or less unthinkable result. But they did so at home with their own crowd in their own small stadium, creating a fantastic atmosphere for them. Yes, they played very well. Yes, Liverpool that day weren't at their best. But everything for that sort of result to come about had to weigh in Watford's favour. That's the only way they could beat Liverpool. For me, under current circumstances, it's much, much less likely that a small team can beat one of the monster teams because that great extraneous factor doesn't exist in their favour. So even if Manchester City come down to Bournemouth, where they might be given a really difficult game because in Bournemouth's tight little stadium, the supporters are right on top of them, and there's just the sense that maybe if everything goes our way and we're all in it together, we just might beat them. I think that vanishes. And I think I'm right in saying there hasn't been what you call a real shock result since the restart. Brighton beat Arsenal, but Arsenal aren't in a great place at the moment, so that wasn't a huge surprise. So yeah, I think essentially you might argue it's a purer sporting contest now because simply the better players will prevail. Others might argue, but that's my perception anyway.
Sure. Moving on to more professional side of your job, in a sense where how does it feel to not? It's two questions that are a bit related, but how does it feel to not being surrounded by other fellow journalists, and how does social distancing work with a co-commentator?
Yeah, well, it doesn't make a huge difference. We're 2 meters apart, but there's nobody between us, so eye contact still exists. It's a bit peculiar because there are times under normal circumstances when broadcasting, especially with a co-commentator you have a good relationship with, where there could be sort of nudges and nods and little movements and ticks that we know each of each other, and that kind of dynamic can't exist. But from 2 meters apart, there's still, you can glance over, you can exchange looks, and hopefully maintain some sort of chemistry. I guess, yeah, there is like a small impediment. There's a small hurdle between you, but that should be okay. And I mean, it depends on the geography of the venue you're talking about. Sometimes you are in an area where there are other journalists and so on about. Sometimes you're quite separate. But I suppose there is, at the start of a game, you soon forget it once you get carried away with the action. But at the start of the game, there's a sort of sense that, wow, everybody can hear what I'm saying here, which is not normal when there are 50,000 people screaming. but in the end, you realise nobody's very interested. Actually, they're all doing their own thing, and it's not an issue.
Yeah, yeah. I was talking to John Cross from the Mirror yesterday,
Yeah,
and he mentioned how, I mean, journalism in a general sense is quite a sociable job, and most people actually do it for a living, or people who just like to chat and get to know others. And yeah, how does it make you feel to just get to this game only 1 hour for start before, and now being able to just interact with others and just having to go there, just be in your seat. I guess you can chat to your co-commentator. That's an advantage,
yeah,
I guess. But how does it feel to not just have the usual routine?
yeah. It's a shame, because part of the pleasure of the job, as you rightly say, and as Crossy would rightly have said, is mixing with others. That's what we do instinctively. And that's what sport is. Never mind journalists covering football or any other sport. Sport is about human interaction. And if that human interaction is taken away from you, a lot of the pleasure of doing it is taken away from you.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, we miss that. There's no question we miss that. But we have to have some perspective and some understanding of where we're at. We're very fortunate that we can at least carry on doing our jobs. To some extent, we are able to meet a few of the people immediately around us. And let's face it, there are a lot of people a lot worse off. You know, if this is the worst outcome of this dreadful pandemic for us, then we haven't got too much to complain at.
Yeah, yeah. I guess my last question, COVID related, would be: would you have accepted to commentate from a studio, or perhaps even from home? Would you think it wouldn't have made a drastic difference considering all these changes?
Well, I have done some commentary from home.
Okay.
Actually, for BT Sport here in the UK, I commentated on quite a few games in the German Bundesliga from home, and I must say, BT Sport have done a wonderful job, technically speaking, to enable that to happen. It's an extraordinary feat, and from a domestic point of view, it's actually very convenient.
Yeah.
From a broadcasting point of view, I've got to say it's not as good,
Yeah,
and I'd be lying if I said otherwise. There just isn't the right ambience. There isn't, you know, that you are reliant on domestic broadband to keep this thing alive, and there's, you know, there's a pretty low threshold in terms of what needs to go wrong for it to go wrong. So you're slightly on edge the whole time, and being at home, being in a studio doing it is never as good as being there, because you just don't get the feel for the game. That sometimes that's an economic reality. You know, you understand if you're doing lower profile stuff, it costs money to send you to places, and you know you're not going to be there. In no sense is this a complaint, but you know, it would be disingenuous of me to say it's absolutely as good to sit in front of a screen, whether in your own home or at a studio, because it's not. You know, you can do a better job if you're there. That for me is a matter of fact. Yeah.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much.
No